My name is Fred Ordway. I have a book here today, The Rocket Team. The Rocket Team is the Wernher von Braun team of rocket specialists that came over after World War II and settled in Fort Bliss, Texas for about 5 years and launched their V-2 rockets from White Sands Missile Range to the north. I worked for that team beginning in 1956. In Huntsville, Alabama. Our group down there at the time was called the Army Ballistic Missile Agency. So the von Braun team stayed with the Army. He was Army ordnance all the time in Germany before World War II and during World War II. When he came over here, he was brought over by Army ordnance. And when the team moved from Fort Bliss, Texas to Huntsville, Alabama in 1950, it was still Army. And they stayed Army until 1960. So Wernher von Braun, contrary to a lot of people's thoughts, was more in the Army than he ever was in NASA. And the whole space program really began by his initiative, working for the U.S. Army. And as a matter of fact, the first American satellite was put up by the Army Ballistic Missile Agency, Explorer 1. That was put up on the 31st of January, 1958, and we just celebrated down in Huntsville, Alabama, that event. We had 1,400 people. You know, on the 31st of January, 2008, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of America in space. The first American satellite was launched by the Army team under Wernher von Braun on the 31st of January, 1958, and in this magazine, I have an article on the restoration of the original Saturn V. We opened that big center in Huntsville, Alabama on the 50th anniversary to coincide with the 50th anniversary of Explorer 1. So in this, underneath this rocket, we had 1,400 guests, black tie dinner, fine meal, wine, the whole works, to celebrate the restoration of this first rocket. This was the first one that was built. It was not built for flight. It was built for facilities and dynamic testing of the Saturn V configuration. So it went through all the exercises that a real Saturn V would have done, going from the factory, going from Huntsville, Alabama, going from the test stations around the country, going by barge down the Tennessee River, the Mississippi River, and around to Cape Canaveral for testing, facilities testing. It was shaken to simulate what a real rocket or a flight rocket would go through during a flight, buffeted by winds, sloshing of fuel. All of these elements were done in this rocket. This rocket here was given a National Historic Monument designation by the Department of Interior, and it is protected by the Department of Interior as a National Historic Monument. And it's also as a National Mechanical Engineering Historic designation. So it is the real thing, and simultaneously, on the 31st of January of this year, we celebrated the completion of the restoration of this giant, which is described in this magazine, and the flight of Explorer 1. All of this was done by a team that was called the Rocket Team back in Germany. That team came over, about 118 of the German scientists and engineers, mostly engineers, to this country, and an American team was built around it. So Army created this team and operated it for exactly, well, it's 10 years in this country, in Huntsville, Alabama. The story that I've told you in just a very few minutes is told in this book, begins in the 1930s in Germany and extends through the Apollo program in the United States. How this team, led by Wernher von Braun, a foreigner, it's often, we think how important some of the foreigners are. Most of our atomic energy people that developed the Manhattan Project, almost all of the leaders were either foreigners or educated overseas. So here's a great example of immigrant group helping out and getting things started, which led us to the moon. Then in 1960, in July of 1960, this team was transferred to the brand new Marshall Space Flight Center, NASA's new center, named after General George Marshall of Marshall Plan fame, and a chief of staff, of course, of the U.S. Army. Kind of ironic when you think about it, a German team and named after Marshall, and General Eisenhower came down with Mrs. Marshall to get it started. And that was where the Saturn program began.